My parents made me watch as they burned my moisturizer in the backyard, while my sister took notes for her training log. When I tried to stand up for myself, my mom pointed at my hands and said, "That softness is why no one respects you." I just stared at her. That was 3 years ago. This morning, she was crying in the hospital hallway, while doctors cut the bandages off what's left of my sister's skin. Growing up, my parents believed soft skin was a sign of weakness. Every night after dinner, my father would run his calloused hand across me and my sister Maya's arms, shaking his head in disgust. "Smooth as a baby's bottom," he'd say, like it was the worst insult imaginable. "Life's going to eat you alive." By the time I was 8, our bathroom looked like a construction site. Pumice stones lined the sink. Different grades of sandpaper hung on hooks labeled morning, afternoon, and before bed. Mom kept a logbook tracking our progress, measuring the thickness of our calluses with special calipers she ordered from a medical supply company. The daily routine started gentle enough. 20 minutes of rough washcloth scrubbing in the morning. Our skin would be raw and pink, but Mom called it glowing with potential. After school, we'd soak our hands and feet in salt water before using the pumice stones until we couldn't feel texture anymore. Maya adapted faster than me. By 4th grade, she could grab the hot oven rack without flinching. She'd show off at school, letting kids punch her arms without reacting. Teachers called home concerned about the scratches and scabs, but my parents convinced them it was just active children being children. The training escalated when we hit middle school. Dad built what he called the reality room in our basement. The floor was covered in different textures: gravel, broken shells, wood chips, and yes, broken glass. We had to walk barefoot through it every morning before breakfast. "Shoes make you soft," Mom would say, bandaging our bleeding feet with pride. Maya thrived in this madness. She started sleeping on a bed of rice to maintain nighttime conditioning. She'd hold her hands over candle flames during homework time, building what she called her armor. I tried to keep up, but every scrape felt like torture. Every blister made me want to cry, which only made things worse. "Your sister has warrior skin," Dad would say during our monthly measurements. "You're still soft, still weak, still unprepared for what life will throw at you." The comparisons drove me deeper into the training. I started using the coarse sandpaper instead of medium. I'd sit in the bathtub with handfuls of sand, scrubbing until the water turned pink, but it was never enough. Maya was always ahead, always tougher, always more loved. High school brought new extremes. Maya discovered online forums about dermal conditioning and started experimenting. She'd order pure lye solutions, industrial-grade exfoliants, things that came with hazmat warnings. Our parents funded every purchase, proud of her innovation. I'll never forget the day she showed me her back. She'd used a cheese grater on herself, creating a crosshatch pattern of scars. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the raised welts. "I can't feel anything anymore. Isn't that the point?" The breaking point came during senior year. I'd secretly been using moisturizer, hiding bottles in my school locker. My girlfriend Emma didn't understand why my hands felt like tree bark, why I flinched when she tried to hold them. When my parents found the lotion, they made me watch as they burned every bottle in the backyard. "You're spitting on everything we've taught you," Mom screamed. "Everything we've sacrificed to make you strong." Maya stood beside them, her skin now more scar tissue than anything else. She'd started a ritual of weekly renewals, where she'd remove entire sections of callus to let them grow back thicker. Her pain tolerance had evolved into something terrifying. She couldn't feel temperature differences anymore, couldn't tell if water was boiling or freezing. I left for college in Colorado, choosing the furthest school that accepted me. For months, I wore gloves constantly, ashamed of my damaged hands. I spent hours in the campus health center, learning that what my parents did had a name: abuse. The therapist cried when I showed her the scars on my feet. Slowly, I began to heal. The calluses softened, the scars faded. I could feel things again: the softness of sheets, the warmth of Emma's touch, textures I'd forgotten existed. Every sensation felt like a small miracle, but Maya went deeper. She sent me photos of her achievements: skin so thick in places it had to be surgically removed when it cracked and got infected. She'd found doctors who would do procedures off the books, ways to artificially thicken dermis layers. Our parents funded it all, bragging to relatives about their daughter's unbreakable skin. The call came on a Tuesday. I'd been avoiding home for 2 years, making excuses for every holiday. But Mom's voice was different, panicked. Maya had gone too far. She'd attempted something she called full renewal, trying to remove too much at once, convinced she could grow back an entire layer of super calloused skin. She'd live, they said, but the damage was extensive. Nerve damage, mobility issues, a lifetime of medical procedures ahead. And still, even from her hospital bed, she was asking when she could start training again. My parents wanted me to come home, to help, to understand, maybe even to resume my own training, to honor Maya's sacrifice. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been funny if it wasn't so sick. I hung up the phone and looked at my hands, the hands of someone who chose healing over hardening. But the story wasn't over. I knew I'd have to go back, to face them and save Maya. The flight back to Michigan felt like traveling backwards through time. Each mile closer to home peeled away the healing I'd worked so hard to achieve. My hands trembled as I gripped the rental car steering wheel, the smooth leather foreign against palms that had finally learned to be soft again. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty at 2 a.m. I'd chosen this time deliberately, hoping to see Maya before our parents arrived for morning visiting hours. The fluorescent lights in the lobby made everything look sickly green, matching how I felt inside. Room 347. I stood outside for a full minute, gathering courage. Through the small window, I could see her lying there, bandages covering most of her arms and legs. Even from here, I could make out the thick, unnatural texture of the exposed skin on her face. I pushed open the door. Maya's eyes snapped open immediately, alert despite the late hour. Recognition flickered across her features, followed by something I couldn't quite read. She tried to sit up, wincing. I moved to help, but she waved me off with a bandaged hand. We stared at each other for a long moment. 2 years of distance hung between us like a physical barrier. Maya broke the silence first. She gestured at my hands, then at hers. The contrast was stark. Mine had returned to normal human softness. Hers looked like they belonged to something else entirely, even through the medical wrappings. I pulled a chair close to her bed. She watched me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, studying my movements like she was cataloging every sign of weakness. Her fingers kept moving against the blanket in the same pattern she used to practice during our training sessions. A nurse came in to check her vitals. Maya barely acknowledged her, keeping her eyes fixed on me. After the nurse left, Maya reached for a notebook on her bedside table. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. She wrote something and turned it toward me. "When did you stop?" I thought about lying, but what was the point? I told her about college, about therapy, about learning that skin was meant to feel things. She listened without expression, occasionally writing questions. How long did it take to get soft? Did it hurt? Could I still handle any pain at all? Her obsession hadn't dimmed. If anything, the forced inactivity seemed to have intensified it. She showed me photos on her phone from before the incident, close-ups of skin so thick it looked like armor plating. She swiped through them with pride, explaining each modification, each procedure, each new threshold she'd crossed. I tried to redirect the conversation to her current condition, but she wasn't interested in discussing recovery. She wanted to talk about her next phase. The setback was temporary, she insisted through gestures and scribbled notes. She'd already researched new techniques, found doctors in other countries who would do things American doctors wouldn't. The door burst open. Our parents stood there, my father's face cycling through emotions before settling on disappointment. Not at Maya's condition, I realized. At my presence. Mom rushed to Maya's side, carefully avoiding looking at me. Dad remained in the doorway, blocking it like he thought I might try to escape. The room suddenly felt much smaller. They fussed over Maya, adjusting her blankets, asking about her pain levels. She brushed off their concerns, gesturing excitedly as she showed them the same photos she'd shown me. They responded with enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. Even here, even now, they were encouraging her. Dad finally acknowledged me, his eyes traveling over my clothes, my posture, lingering on my hands. I knew what he saw. Softness, weakness, everything he'd tried to train out of me, returned in full. Mom pulled out a folder from her bag. Treatment options, she explained to Maya. Not for healing, I realized as I glimpsed the papers. For continuing. Doctors who specialized in tissue modification. Experimental procedures. Ways to build back even thicker than before. Maya's eyes lit up. She grabbed for the papers, studying them with the same intensity she used to reserve for training manuals. Our parents exchanged satisfied looks over her head. I stood up. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, only one with any warmth. Maya's expression was curious, almost pitying, like I was a specimen that had failed to thrive. Dad moved from the doorway, circling around to stand beside Mom. They formed a united front, Maya between them like a prize they were protecting. I wonder what made these parents think turning their kids into human leather was somehow preparing them for life. The way they're still pushing medical procedures on Maya while she's lying there with nerve damage makes me really curious about their own backgrounds. The message was clear. I was the outsider now, the one who had betrayed everything they stood for. I tried anyway. I mentioned the nerve damage, the mobility issues, the lifetime of medical procedures the doctors had described. Mom cut me off with a sharp gesture. Those doctors didn't understand, she insisted. They saw problems where the family saw potential. Maya nodded along, adding her own notes about pain being temporary, but strength being forever. The phrases were so familiar they made my chest ache. We'd heard them 1,000 times growing up. Maya had internalized them so completely they'd become her own thoughts. Dad started talking about the new equipment he'd ordered for when Maya came home. Special tools for her rehabilitation, he called them, though the description sounded more like torture devices. Maya's excitement grew with each item he listed. I watched this scene unfold with a strange detachment. 2 years of therapy had given me distance, perspective. I could see the sickness now, name it for what it was, but knowing didn't make it easier to witness. A doctor entered, looking harried. He glanced at the crowd around Maya's bed with disapproval. Visiting hours had been over for hours, he pointed out. Only one family member could stay overnight. My parents immediately claimed that right, both talking over each other about why they needed to be the one. The doctor held up a hand. The patient could choose, he said. Hospital policy. Maya looked between our parents and me. For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in her expression. A crack in the armor she'd built, not just on her skin, but around her mind. She pointed at me. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face crumpled. Dad's went hard as stone. They tried to argue, but the doctor was already ushering them toward the door. Dad turned back once, his look promising this wasn't over. Alone again, Maya and I sat in the quiet hum of hospital machinery. She wrote another note, longer this time. She wanted to know about Emma, about my life in Colorado, about what it felt like to choose softness. I talked through the night, telling her things I'd never thought I'd share, about the first time I'd cried in therapy, about learning to accept gentle touch without flinching, about discovering that strength didn't require suffering. She listened, really listened this time. Occasionally she'd touch her bandages, wincing at what lay beneath. I saw doubt creep into her eyes, quickly suppressed, but there nonetheless. As dawn broke through the hospital windows, she fell asleep mid-conversation. I watched her face relax, looking younger without the constant tension of maintaining her image. Under all that damaged tissue was still my little sister. My phone buzzed. Multiple messages from our parents, demands to know what I was telling her, threats about what would happen if I tried to interfere with her recovery, reminders that I'd chosen to leave the family, so I had no right to return now. I deleted them without responding. Maya stirred but didn't wake. I carefully took her hand, feeling the unnatural thickness even through the bandages. She'd gone so far down this path, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to help her find a way back. The morning shift nurse arrived, checking charts and adjusting IV lines. She mentioned that Maya would be discharged in a few days if her infection markers stayed low. Back to our parents' house, back to the reality room and the training regimen, and the constant pressure to be harder, tougher, more damaged. Unless I did something about it, the thought settled in my stomach like a stone. I'd run away once, saved myself, but I'd left Maya behind to sink deeper into the madness. Now she was drowning in it, and our parents were holding her under while calling it swimming lessons. I had a few days to figure out how to save someone who didn't want to be saved, from parents who saw their abuse as love, in a world that would likely side with them. The task felt impossible, but as I sat there in the growing morning light, watching my sister sleep, I knew I had to try. The soft hands she'd mocked could still fight, just differently than our parents had taught us. The battle for Maya's future had begun. The morning brought complications. Maya woke disoriented, her eyes darting between me and the door like she expected our parents to materialize. She fumbled for her phone, scrolling through messages I could see were from them. Her face hardened with each one she read. I watched her type responses, her damaged fingers struggling with the screen. She kept glancing at me, then back at her phone, clearly reporting on my presence. The fragile connection we'd built during the night seemed to evaporate with the sunrise. A different doctor arrived for morning rounds, younger than the one from last night. He examined Maya's bandages while explaining the treatment plan. She barely listened, instead pulling out the folder our parents had left. She thrust it at him, pointing insistently at the experimental procedures listed inside. The doctor's expression shifted from professional to concerned as he read. He explained these weren't medically advisable, that her body needed time to heal before considering any procedures. Maya's agitation grew. She grabbed her notebook, writing furiously about how doctors didn't understand her goals. I tried to intervene, explaining our family's history to the doctor. Maya turned on me then, her eyes flashing with anger. She wrote a single word and held it up. Traitor. The doctor suggested a psychiatric consultation. Maya's reaction was immediate and violent. She threw the notebook across the room, tried to rip out her IV. 2 nurses rushed in to help restrain her while she thrashed against them. They sedated her lightly, just enough to calm the panic. As the medication took effect, I saw fear replace anger in her eyes. Not fear of the doctors or the hospital, fear of getting soft, fear of losing what she'd spent years building. Our parents arrived an hour later, earlier than official visiting hours, but somehow granted access anyway. They swept into the room like they owned it, Mom immediately checking Maya's bandages while Dad cornered the doctor in the hallway. I could hear him through the door, his voice low but insistent. He mentioned lawyers, patient rights, religious freedom. The young doctor looked overwhelmed, glancing between Dad and the nurse's station for support. Mom pretended I wasn't there at first, focusing entirely on Maya. She produced a small bag from her purse, items she'd brought from home. I recognized them immediately. Pumice stones, rough cloths, the specialized callus building cream Maya had mail-ordered from Thailand. She began explaining to the barely conscious Maya how they could maintain her conditioning even in the hospital. Small exercises, she demonstrated frustrated, rubbing the pumice stone against her own palm, just enough to prevent backsliding. I stood up, positioning myself between Mom and Maya's bed. Mom finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of disgust and pity. She informed me that I had no say in Maya's care, that I'd forfeited that right when I abandoned the family. Dad returned from the hallway, the doctor nowhere to be seen. He announced they'd reached an understanding about Maya's treatment. The hospital would focus on infection control and basic healing. Everything else would be the family's decision. They'd brought paperwork, medical power of attorney documents, apparently prepared years ago when Maya turned 18. She'd signed them willingly, giving our parents complete control over her medical decisions. Dad waved them at me like a victory flag. The sedation was wearing off. Maya blinked slowly, taking in the scene. Our parents on one side of her bed, me on the other. Mom showed her the supplies she'd brought, and Maya's face lit up with relief. I watched them plan her recovery routine. Gentle abrasion work while the bandages were changed. Isometric exercises to maintain muscle tension. Visualization techniques to keep her mind focused on her goals. It was horrifying how methodical they were, how they'd adapted their abuse to a medical setting. A new nurse arrived for bandage changes. Our parents insisted on staying, on helping. They wanted to see the damage, to assess how much work would be needed. The nurse hesitated but couldn't find a policy to refuse them. As the bandages came off, I had to look away. The exposed skin was worse than I'd imagined. Not just thick and scarred, but infected in places. Weeping fluid. Normal human tissue trying desperately to heal while fighting against years of intentional damage. Our parents' reaction was the opposite of mine. They leaned in closer, discussing the texture, the consistency. Mom took photos for their records. Dad pointed out areas that showed excellent development despite the current setback. Maya watched their faces, reading their approval like a desperate student checking grades. When Mom praised a particularly thick section on her forearm, Maya's whole body relaxed. This was what she needed more than medicine, their validation. The nurse finished rewrapping the wounds, clearly disturbed by my parents' behavior, but unsure how to address it. She mentioned that a social worker would be stopping by later for a routine check. Dad's expression darkened at this news. After the nurse left, our parents shifted into crisis mode. They coached Maya on what to say to the social worker, emphasized that this was her choice, her lifestyle, her personal freedom. They reminded her of all the online communities that supported extreme body modification. I tried to counter their narrative, but Maya wasn't listening to me anymore. She was fully back in their world, nodding along to their instructions. When I persisted, Dad stepped between us, using his body to block my view of Maya. He informed me visiting hours were for family only. The medical power of attorney papers from when Maya turned 18 make me wonder how long they've been planning for exactly this kind of situation. They brought pumice stones to a hospital room while their daughter's skin is literally infected and weeping. That I'd made my choice to leave, and that choice had consequences. Mom added that they'd already spoken to hospital security about limiting access to Maya's room. Only approved visitors from now on. I refused to leave. Dad's face flushed red, the same color it used to turn before he'd make us do extra sessions in the reality room. But here, in public, he couldn't do what he wanted. He had to maintain the image of concerned parent. Security arrived within minutes. Dad explained calmly that I was estranged from the family, that my presence was upsetting their daughter during her recovery. He showed them the power of attorney documents, pointed out that Maya hadn't included me on her approved visitor list. The security guards looked apologetic but firm. Hospital policy was clear. I had to leave unless the patient specifically requested my presence. All eyes turned to Maya. She looked at me for a long moment. I saw conflict in her eyes. The war between the sister who'd chosen me last night and the daughter who craved our parents' approval. The decision took less than 5 seconds. She shook her head. The security guards escorted me out, past the nurse's station where staff avoided eye contact, down the elevator, through the lobby. They were professional about it, even kind. One mentioned there was a coffee shop across the street where people often waited. I sat in that coffee shop for hours, staring at my phone. Emma had texted, asking how things were going. I couldn't figure out how to explain that I'd lost the first battle before it really began. The social worker would be my next chance. I called the hospital, asked to be connected to their department. After being transferred multiple times, I reached someone who would listen. I explained our family's history, the abuse disguised as training, Maya's current vulnerability. The social worker I spoke with sounded concerned but cautious. Without Maya's cooperation, she explained, their options were limited. Maya was an adult who'd given medical power of attorney to her parents. Unless she revoked that or asked for help, there was little they could do. I provided what documentation I could. Emails Maya had sent me over the years, photos of injuries from our childhood, contact information for my therapist who could verify my story. The social worker promised to look into it, but her tone suggested she'd seen too many cases where the victim protected the abuser. From the coffee shop window, I could see the hospital entrance. I watched for my parents' car, planning to follow them when they left. If I couldn't see Maya in the hospital, maybe I could find another way. They emerged in the late afternoon, looking pleased with themselves. I followed at a distance as they drove to a medical supply store. Through the window, I watched them purchase items I recognized all too well. Specialized brushes, medical-grade abrasives, the kinds of tools that shouldn't exist outside of industrial settings. Their next stop was more surprising, a lawyer's office. They spent over an hour inside while I waited in my rental car, wondering what new legal barriers they were constructing. When they finally left, Mom was carrying a thick folder of documents. I followed them home, to the house I'd fled 2 years ago. It looked the same from the outside, normal, suburban, hiding its secrets behind painted shutters and a manicured lawn. They went inside without looking back, confident in their victory. That night, I parked down the street and watched the house. The basement lights were on, the reality room still in use. I wondered if they were preparing it for Maya's return, adding new features for her advanced training. My phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code. It was the social worker from the hospital. She'd met with Maya, she reported, and found no evidence of current abuse or coercion. Maya had been articulate about her choices, had shown her online communities, had insisted this was her path. The social worker had noticed the concerning family dynamics, she admitted, but without clear evidence of immediate danger or Maya requesting help, there was nothing more she could do. She suggested I consider family counseling if everyone was willing. I almost laughed at that suggestion. Family counseling with parents who saw torture as love and a sister too deep in their programming to recognize abuse. But I thanked her for trying and hung up. The next morning, I returned to the hospital early, hoping to catch a shift change when security might be less vigilant. But our parents had been thorough. My photo was at the security desk with clear instructions. No access to Maya's room. I tried calling Maya's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her social media had gone dark too, either deleted or blocked from my view. Our parents had cut off every avenue of communication. For 2 days, I haunted that coffee shop, watching the entrance, hoping for a chance. I saw our parents come and go, sometimes carrying bags of supplies. Once, I caught a glimpse of Maya being wheeled to another floor for tests. She looked straight ahead, not scanning the lobby like someone hoping to see a familiar face. On the 3rd day, I noticed someone else watching the hospital entrance, a woman about my age sitting alone, nervously checking her phone. Something about her vigilance felt familiar. When our parents walked past her, she tensed, shrinking back like she wanted to disappear. I approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as I sat down, and I saw recognition recognition dawn on her face. She knew who I was, had seen family photos. Her name was Victoria, and she'd been Maya's friend in high school. Victoria had tried to maintain contact with Maya over the years, she explained, but it had become increasingly difficult. Maya's obsession had consumed everything, pushing away anyone who questioned it. But Victoria had never stopped caring, never stopped worrying. She'd heard about Maya's hospitalization through mutual acquaintances, had been trying to visit but was told Maya wasn't accepting visitors outside family. She'd been coming here every day, hoping for a chance to see her friend. I explained the situation, the power of attorney, the security restrictions. Victoria listened with growing anger. She'd suspected our parents were involved in Maya's extreme behavior, but had never understood the depth of their control. We exchanged numbers, agreeing to stay in contact. Victoria mentioned she still had friends who knew Maya, people who'd been pushed away but still cared. Maybe together we could find a way to reach her. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was the young doctor who'd examined Maya that first morning. He was careful with his words, clearly walking a professional line, but his message was clear. Maya would be discharged tomorrow. Her infection markers had improved enough for outpatient treatment. Our parents had arranged for a private nurse to handle wound care at home. The doctor couldn't override the discharge without medical justification, but he wanted someone to know who actually cared about Maya's well-being. I thanked him and immediately called Victoria. We had less than 24 hours before Maya disappeared back into our parents' house, back into the reality room, back into the cycle of abuse disguised as strength training. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, surrounded by printed articles about cult deprogramming, family intervention strategies, legal options for vulnerable adults. Everything I read said the same thing. Without the victim's cooperation, options were severely limited, but I couldn't give up. Maya had chosen me that first night for a reason. Somewhere beneath the programming, beneath the scar tissue, both physical and mental, my sister was still there. I just had to find a way to reach her. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. She'd rallied 3 other former friends of Maya's. They all wanted to help, had stories about trying to intervene over the years. We arranged to meet that night to plan our approach. The meeting was emotional. Each person shared their memories of Maya before the obsession consumed her. A talented artist, a kind friend, someone who used to laugh easily. They also shared their attempts to help and the painful rejections that followed. We developed a plan. Not perfect, but it was something. The hospital discharge would be our opportunity. A moment of transition when Maya might be more vulnerable, more open to seeing familiar faces who'd cared about her. Victoria had kept some of Maya's artwork from high school, pieces she'd created before our parents convinced her that art was a distraction from training. We'd bring those, along with photos from happier times, reminders of who she used to be. It was a long shot. We all knew that, but it was better than letting her disappear back into our parents' world without trying. We agreed to meet at the hospital early, to position ourselves where Maya would have to pass during discharge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Maya's face when she'd chosen me over our parents that first night. That crack in her armor had been real. I had to believe it could open again. Morning came too quickly. I arrived at the hospital to find Victoria and the others already there, spread throughout the lobby to avoid attracting security attention. We dressed casually, hoping to blend in with other visitors. Our parents arrived at exactly 9 a.m., efficient as always. They moved through the lobby with purpose, Mom carrying a bag of clothes for Maya, Dad handling paperwork at the discharge desk. They never noticed the people watching them. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the elevator opened and Maya appeared in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. Our parents flanked her immediately, Mom fussing with a blanket across Maya's lap, Dad directing the nurse toward the exit. Victoria moved first, stepping directly into their path with a bright smile. Victoria stepping into their path makes me wonder what kind of courage that took after years of being pushed away by Maya. The way the parents never noticed all these watchers in the lobby. Are they really that focused or just that confident in their control? The recognition on Maya's face was immediate. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been pleasure before it shifted to wariness. Our parents tried to redirect around Victoria, but the other friends had positioned themselves strategically, not blocking exactly, but creating a moment where forward movement had to pause. In that pause, Victoria knelt beside the wheelchair. She didn't speak at first, just held out a small canvas, one of Maya's paintings from senior year, a self-portrait where her skin was normal, soft-looking, her expression peaceful. Maya stared at it like she'd forgotten it existed. Dad intervened, trying to take the painting, but Victoria held firm. She spoke directly to Maya, reminding her of the art show where this had won first place. How proud Maya had been, how she'd talked about applying to art school before everything changed. The other friends joined in, each sharing a memory, holding out photos. Maya's eyes darted between them, overwhelmed. Mom tried to shield her, insisting she needed rest, but Maya raised a bandaged hand to stop her. For a moment, the lobby fell silent. Maya looked at each face surrounding her, friends she'd pushed away, people who still cared despite everything. Then she looked at our parents, who were radiating disapproval and impatience. Finally, she looked at me. I'd stayed back, letting her friends take the lead, but now I stepped forward. I didn't have photos or artwork. I just had myself, proof that there was another way to live. Maya's mouth moved like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. The conflict in her eyes was painful to watch. Two worlds pulling at her, the one she'd been programmed to want, and the one she'd abandoned. Dad made the decision for her. He grabbed the wheelchair handles from the nurse, announcing that Maya needed to leave immediately. The friends stepped aside, knowing they couldn't physically prevent it without causing a scene that would only hurt Maya. As Dad pushed her toward the exit, Maya turned in the chair, craning to look back at us. Victoria called out that they'd always be there when she was ready. The others echoed similar sentiments. I said nothing, just maintained eye contact until the automatic doors closed between us. We stood in the lobby afterward, deflated but not defeated. Victoria suggested we keep meeting, keep trying. The others agreed. We'd planted seeds of doubt, reminded Maya that another life existed outside our parents' control. Sometimes that was all you could do. I returned to my hotel room and found a voicemail from Emma. She was worried, wanted to know if I was okay. I called her back, finally breaking down as I explained everything. She listened without judgment, offering to fly out and help. I told her not to come yet. This was something I had to navigate carefully, but knowing she was there, ready to support me, gave me strength I desperately needed. That evening, I drove past our parents' house again. The basement lights were on, as expected, but something else caught my attention. A curtain moving in Maya's old bedroom window. She was watching the street. I parked where she could see me and waited. After a few minutes, the curtain fell back into place, but she'd seen me. She knew I hadn't given up. That had to count for something. The next few days fell into a pattern. I'd park where Maya could see me from her window, always at different times to avoid our parents' notice. Victoria and the others took turns too, a rotating reminder that the outside world hadn't forgotten her. On the 4th day, something changed. When I arrived for my evening vigil, there was already a car in my usual spot, not one I recognized. I parked further down and watched. A woman emerged from the house, the private nurse our parents had hired, but instead of leaving immediately, she sat in her car for several minutes, seeming troubled. Finally, she drove away, but slowly, like she was reluctant to go. I followed her to a nearby grocery store parking lot where she pulled over and made a phone call. Her body language suggested distress, hand gestures, shaking her head. Whatever she'd seen in that house had disturbed her. When she finished the call, I made a split-second decision. I approached her car, introduced myself as Maya's brother. her. Her expression went from suspicious to relieved in seconds. The nurse, Thon, had been struggling with what she'd witnessed. The wound care she'd been hired for had evolved into something else entirely. Our parents were having her assist with their training regimen, using her medical knowledge to push boundaries safely. She described procedures that made me sick, controlled abrasions during bandage changes, exercises designed to maintain calluses even on healing tissue. Maya was cooperating, even requesting more aggressive treatment, but Thon could see the underlying dynamic. Thon was caught between professional obligations and personal ethics. She needed the job, but couldn't stomach being part of what she now recognized as abuse. She'd been debating whether to report it, but wasn't sure anyone would take it seriously given Maya's apparent consent. I gave her the social worker's contact information, begged her to document everything she saw, then seemed relieved to have someone validate her concerns. She promised to take photos, keep notes, build a case that might actually help. We exchanged numbers before parting. Finally, I had someone on the inside, someone who could see what was happening when I couldn't. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had an hour ago. That night, Victoria texted with news. One of Maya's online communities had started questioning her recent posts. People were noticing inconsistencies, wondering if her achievements had crossed into self-harm territory. A few members had even suggested she seek professional help. Our parents must have noticed too, because Maya's accounts went silent after that. But the seeds of doubt were spreading beyond just her old friends. Her own community was beginning to question the path she'd chosen. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Than called early, whispering urgently. Maya had developed a fever overnight, one of her wounds showing signs of serious infection. Our parents were refusing to take her to the hospital, insisting they could manage it at home. Then had threatened to call an ambulance herself, which had led to a confrontation. Our parents had fired her on the spot, but not before she'd documented Maya's condition. She was heading to the hospital now to file a report with their ethics committee. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for, a medical emergency that couldn't be explained away as lifestyle choice. I called Victoria and the others, alerting them to the situation. We agreed to meet at the hospital, ready to advocate for Maya if she was brought in. Hours passed with no word. Than's report had been filed, but without Maya actually at the hospital, options were limited. Adult Protective Services had been notified, but their response time was measured in days, not hours. By afternoon, I couldn't wait anymore. I drove to the house, parking directly in front this time. If our parents wanted to call the police, let them. At least it would create a record, draw attention to the situation. I rang the doorbell repeatedly until Dad answered. His face was haggard, stress showing in ways I'd never seen before. Behind him, I could hear Mom's voice, high and panicked, though I couldn't make out the words. Dad tried to close the door, but I wedged my foot in the gap. I told him I knew about the infection, about firing Than, about their refusal to get Maya proper medical care. His expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear. Mom appeared behind him, and I saw she'd been crying. The controlled, methodical woman who documented our torture for years looked genuinely shaken. She started to speak, then stopped, then started again. Maya was getting worse, she admitted. The fever wasn't breaking. They'd tried everything they knew, but nothing was working. The admission seemed to physically pain her, like acknowledging failure was worse than watching her daughter suffer. I pushed past them into the house. They didn't try to stop me. The living room had been converted into a makeshift medical station. Boxes of supplies, reference books, printed articles from questionable sources about natural healing for extreme body modification. Maya was on the couch, unconscious or close to it. Her skin was flushed with fever, bandages soaked with drainage. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, all that artificial armor failing to protect her from basic biology. I pulled out my phone to call 911. Dad grabbed for it, but his heart wasn't in the struggle. I could see the war in his face, the ideology he'd built his life around crashing against the reality of his daughter dying in front of him. Mom was the one who broke first. She collapsed beside Maya, sobbing that this wasn't supposed to happen. The training was supposed to make her strong, invincible. How could someone with skin like armor be defeated by something as simple as infection? The paramedics arrived within minutes. They took one look at Maya and began working with urgent efficiency. 4 lines, antibiotics, oxygen. They asked rapid-fire questions that our parents couldn't answer. What medications had she taken? What was the timeline of symptoms? Why had they waited so long to call? I provided what information I could while our parents stood frozen, watching their belief system crumble as strangers worked to save their daughter's life. The lead paramedic's expression was grim as they prepared to transport. At the hospital, Maya was rushed to intensive care. Sepsis, they explained. The infection had spread to her bloodstream. If we'd waited much longer, it might have been too late. As it was, her chances were uncertain. Our parents seemed to age years in hours. Calling about Maya's fever right when the parents are refusing hospital care seems like perfect timing. Almost too perfect. Her getting fired for threatening to call an ambulance makes me curious about what other nurses might have quit this job before her without speaking up. They sat in the waiting room, not speaking, not meeting anyone's eyes. The foundation of their world had cracked, and they didn't know how to process it. Victoria and the others arrived, forming a protective circle in the waiting room. They brought coffee, blankets, quiet support. Even for our parents, though Mom and Dad didn't acknowledge the kindness. A doctor emerged after what felt like days, but was probably hours. Maya was stable but critical. They were treating the infection aggressively, but her body's response was complicated by the extensive tissue damage. It would be touch and go for the next 48 hours. The doctor also mentioned that social services would be involved given the circumstances of her admission. The delay in seeking treatment, the extensive scarring, the reports from the fired nurse. It all painted a concerning picture that required investigation. Dad started to protest, falling back on his usual arguments about personal freedom and lifestyle choices. But the words rang hollow even to him now. Mom just stared at her hands, the same hands that had measured our calluses with such pride. I was allowed to see Maya briefly. She was sedated, machines breathing for her, looking nothing like the warrior our parents had tried to create. Just a damaged young woman fighting for her life because of choices that were never really hers. That night, I stayed in the ICU waiting room. Our parents had gone home, unable to maintain their vigil. Victoria stayed with me, along with one other friend. We didn't talk much, just sat with the weight of what might happen. Somewhere in the early morning hours, Mom returned alone. She looked different, smaller, uncertain. She sat across from me, struggling with words that had probably never crossed her mind before. She asked if I thought Maya would forgive them, if there was any way to undo what they'd done. The questions seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised me, like she couldn't believe she was asking them. I didn't have answers. How do you forgive parents who tortured you in the name of love? How do you undo decades of programming? But the fact that she was asking meant something had finally broken through. We sat in silence until the sun came up. Two people who shared blood but little else, waiting to see if Maya would survive the strength our parents had forced upon her. The battle for her future had become a battle for her life, but she was still fighting, and as long as she was fighting, there was hope. The soft hands she'd mocked had brought her to safety. Now it was up to her to decide if she wanted to stay. The next 48 hours blurred together in a haze of hospital corridors and waiting room coffee. Maya's condition fluctuated wildly. Moments of improvement followed by terrifying setbacks. The machines surrounding her bed became my constant companions, their beeps and hums a language I learned to interpret. Our parents maintained an erratic bureaucratic presence. Dad would arrive early, pacing the hallway while clutching medical journals he'd printed from dubious websites. He'd corner any medical staff who'd listen, proposing alternative treatments based on his research into extreme tissue conditioning recovery protocols. The nurses learned to avoid him. Mom's approach differed. She'd sit beside Maya's bed for hours, not speaking, just staring at the bandages covering her daughter's arms. Sometimes I'd catch her touching her own hands, running fingers over calluses she'd maintained for decades. The confusion in her eyes was almost painful to witness. Victoria coordinated with the other friends to maintain a constant presence. Someone was always there, a reminder that Maya had connections beyond our family's twisted dynamic. They brought small items, a favorite book from high school, a playlist of songs Maya used to love, photos from before the obsession consumed everything. On the third day, Maya's fever finally broke. The doctor announced cautiously optimistic news about her infection markers. She'd turned a corner, though recovery would be long and complicated. They began reducing her sedation, preparing for her to regain consciousness. I was there when her eyes first fluttered open. The disorientation was immediate, her gaze darting around the ICU, taking in the machines, the sterile environment, the soft hospital blankets against her damaged skin. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Relief? Fear? Both? She tried to move, wincing at the pull of IV lines and monitor cables. Her hands went immediately to her arms, feeling the bandages, assessing, even barely conscious. Her first instinct was to check her armor. Mom rushed in, having somehow sensed Maya was awake. She hovered anxiously, reaching toward Maya, then pulling back, unsure what role to play now that her training methods had nearly culled her daughter. Dad followed, carrying a folder I recognized. More research, more alternative treatments, more ways to rebuild what the infection had threatened. Maya's attention shifted between them and me, clearly processing the dynamics. She gestured weakly for water. As I helped her with the straw, I noticed her studying her hands, the way they shook, the weakness in her grip. For someone who'd prided herself on feeling nothing, she was feeling everything now. The doctor arrived to assess her cognitive function. Maya responded to his tests with growing agitation, especially when he mentioned the extensive tissue damage and the long recovery ahead. She kept looking at our parents, seeking reassurance they couldn't provide. Their ideology had no answer for this. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Maya would make progress, then panic about getting soft and demand to start exercises. The medical staff refused, explaining her body needed to heal. Our parents would then huddle with her, whispering about maintenance routines and comeback strategies, undoing whatever acceptance the doctors had achieved. I watched this cycle repeat, frustration building. Every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. The friends tried intervening, bringing art supplies and books, but Maya showed no interest. She was fixated solely on her skin, on returning to her previous state. Than, the fired nurse, visited during one of these episodes. She'd been following Maya's case, feeling responsible despite doing everything she could. She watched our parents coaching Maya through isometric exercises against medical advice, her expression hardening. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and handed me a USB drive. Documentation, she explained, everything she'd witnessed, in case we needed it. The social worker assigned to Maya's case was a tired-looking woman who'd clearly seen too much. She interviewed each of us separately, taking careful notes. Maya insisted this was her choice, showing photos from her online communities, explaining her journey with practiced phrases our parents had taught her. The social worker's skepticism was evident, but without Maya's cooperation, her options were limited. A week into recovery, Maya was moved to a regular room. The immediate danger had passed, but the real battle was just beginning. Physical therapy sessions became battlegrounds. Maya refused to do exercises designed for healing, insisting on modifications that would maintain her calluses. She accused the therapists of trying to make her weak. Our parents supported her resistance. They brought supplies from home, her specialized tools, photos of her achievements, messages from online supporters. They transformed her hospital room into a shrine to her obsession, reinforcing the very mindset that had nearly culled her. I tried a different approach. During one of their absences, I sat with Maya and pulled out my phone, not to lecture or plead, but to show her videos Emma had sent. My life in Colorado. Simple things. Cooking dinner with soft hands that could feel textures, rock climbing where sensation was crucial for safety, playing guitar, something impossible with the thick calluses our parents had demanded. Maya watched with an expression I couldn't read. When the videos ended, she stared at her bandaged hands for a long moment. Then she asked for her phone and showed me recent posts from her community. Several members had developed serious complications. One had lost mobility in her hands entirely. Another was facing amputation. The comments were split between admiration and concern. That afternoon, our parents arrived with news. They'd found a facility in Mexico that specialized in alternative recovery methods for extreme body modification. They could transfer Maya there once she was stable enough to travel. The excitement in their voices was chilling. They saw this setback as an opportunity to push even further. Maya's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of enthusiasm, she showed uncertainty. She asked about success rates, about risks, about what would happen if things went wrong again. Our parents dismissed her concerns, insisting this was just temporary weakness from the medication. The real Maya, the strong Maya, would never question the path. That night, I found Maya attempting to use her phone with bandaged fingers. She was reading through old conversations with the friends who'd visited, messages from before the obsession took hold, invitations she'd declined, concerns she'd dismissed, a life she'd abandoned. The next morning brought a setback. One of Maya's wounds had reopened during the night, possibly from unauthorized exercises. The doctor was furious, threatening to restrict all visitors if the behavior continued. Our parents tried to blame the medical staff, but their protests rang hollow. During the bandage change, I watched Maya's face. The pain was evident despite years of conditioning, but more than that, I saw fear, not of the pain itself, but of what she was seeing. Tissue that might never fully recover, damage that went beyond what she'd intended. The reality was setting in. Victoria arrived with a tablet, insisting Maya watch something. Maya asking our parents if this was her choice while showing those practiced phrases makes me curious about what she really believes versus what she's been taught to say. It was a video message from her old art teacher, someone Maya had idolized before our parents convinced her art was weakness. The teacher spoke about Maya's talent, about the scholarship opportunities she'd passed up, about how creativity required sensitivity, not armor. Maya watched the entire message without expression, but afterward, she asked Victoria to leave the tablet. Throughout the day, I caught her rewatching it, pausing on images of her old artwork. The contrast between who she'd been and who she'd become was stark. Our parents noticed the shift. They intensified their efforts, bringing more extreme examples from online communities. People who'd gone further than Maya, who'd achieved things she hadn't yet imagined. They spoke about the Mexico facility constantly, painting it as a paradise for people like her. The social worker returned for a follow-up. This time, she brought a psychologist who specialized in body dysmorphic disorders. Our parents tried to refuse the consultation, but the hospital insisted. Maya was resistant at first, giving rehearsed answers about personal choice and bodily autonomy. But the psychologist was patient, asking questions that went deeper. When had she first felt her skin was wrong? What did she think would happen when she achieved her goal? Had she ever imagined a future beyond the next modification? Maya's answers answers became less certain as the session progressed. That evening, I overheard our parents arguing in the hallway. Mom wanted to accelerate the Mexico plan. Dad thought they should wait until Maya was stronger. The cracks in their united front were showing. The near loss of their daughter had shaken something fundamental in their belief system. Maya must have heard them too. When I checked on her, she was staring out the window with an expression I'd never seen before. Doubt. Real, genuine doubt about the path she'd chosen. She gestured for me to sit, then spent an hour showing me her online community's recent posts. The tone had shifted. More members were questioning the extreme practices. Some were sharing stories of permanent damage, of regret, of trying to reverse modifications that couldn't be undone. The next day, Maya asked to see the friends who'd visited. Our parents tried to discourage it, but she insisted. One by one, they came. Victoria brought more of Maya's old artwork. Another friend shared photos from high school trips Maya had forgotten. They didn't push or pressure, just reminded her of who she'd been before. After they left, Maya was quiet for hours. When our parents arrived with more information about the Mexico facility, she asked questions that made them uncomfortable. What about the people who didn't recover? What about the ones who regretted it? What happened when you couldn't go any further? Dad's response was typical. Those people were weak, uncommitted, not true believers. But something in his voice had changed. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. He needed Maya to believe because if she didn't, what had it all been for? That night, I stayed late. Maya was attempting to draw with her bandaged hands, frustrated by the limited mobility. The sketch was rough but recognizable. A self-portrait, not the warrior she'd tried to become, but something in between. Someone searching for identity beyond the scars. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A nurse was changing Maya's bandages when our parents arrived with a new tool they'd ordered online, something designed to maintain calluses during recovery. They insisted the nurse use it during wound care. The nurse refused. Our parents became aggressive, demanding to speak to supervisors, threatening legal action. Maya watched this unfold with growing distress. The nurse was trying to help her heal, and our parents were actively preventing it. The conflict was so clear, so undeniable. When security arrived to escort our parents out, Maya didn't protest. She just watched them go with an expression of profound exhaustion. That evening, she asked me to help her look at apartments in Colorado. Not to commit, she clarified, just to see. We spent hours browsing listings near my place, imagining a different life. She asked about therapy, about how long it took to feel normal again, about whether Emma would accept her despite everything. Our parents returned the next day as if nothing had happened. They brought new articles about revolutionary treatments, testimonials from people who'd pushed even further than Maya. But their audience had changed. Maya listened politely, then asked them to leave. She needed rest, she said. Real rest. The confrontation that followed was painful to witness. Dad accused me of poisoning her mind. Mom cried about everything they'd sacrificed to make her strong. They pulled out photo albums documenting her journey, trying to remind her of how far she'd come. Maya looked at the images, the progression of damage, the pride in their faces as she'd hurt herself more each year, and something finally broke. She asked them why. Not angrily, just genuinely curious. Why had they needed her to suffer? What were they so afraid would happen if she was soft? The question seemed to shatter something in our parents. They'd never examined their own motivations, never questioned the foundation of their beliefs. Mom tried to explain about preparing for a harsh world, about building resilience, but the words sounded hollow now, faced with the reality of what they'd done. Dad fell back on anger, insisting Maya was betraying everything they taught her. But even he seemed to realize how absurd it sounded. Betraying abuse wasn't betrayal at all. The social worker arrived during this confrontation. She took in the scene, our parents' desperation, Maya's exhaustion, the evidence of years of systematic abuse scattered across the bed. She suggested family counseling again, but this time as a condition of continued contact. Our parents had a choice: acknowledge what they'd done or lose access to their daughter. They left without agreeing, clinging to their denial. But I saw something in Mom's eyes as they walked out, the beginning of recognition. The ideology that had defined their lives was crumbling, and they didn't know who they were without it. Over the next week, Maya's recovery accelerated, not just physically, but mentally. She started participating in physical therapy properly. She let the nurses treat her wounds without resistance. She even asked for moisturizer, something that would have been unthinkable weeks before. The friends visited regularly, bringing pieces of the life she'd abandoned. Maya began engaging, asking about their lives, showing interest in things beyond skin thickness. She started drawing again, her hands slowly regaining dexterity. The art was different now, darker, more complex, processing trauma through creation. Our parents attempted one final intervention. They arrived with a lawyer, power of attorney documents, threats about their legal rights. But Maya was ready. She revoked the power of attorney, clearly and legally. She thanked them for raising her, but stated she needed space to heal. The lawyer confirmed it was binding. The defeat in our parents' faces was complete. They built their entire identity around creating an invulnerable daughter, and she was choosing vulnerability instead. Dad made one last attempt, warning about how soft she'd become, how unprepared for life's hardships. Maya's response was simple. She'd rather feel pain than nothing at all. They left, and I haven't seen them since. Mom sends occasional messages, stilted attempts at normal conversation that avoid mentioning the past. Dad remains silent, unable to accept the failure of his life's work. Maybe someday they'll truly understand what they did. Maybe not. Maya's discharge day arrived 3 weeks after admission. She was nervous about leaving the hospital's safety, about facing a world where she'd have to choose recovery every single day. But she was also determined. The friends had found her a temporary place to stay, away from our parents' influence. Victoria had arranged job interviews for when she was ready. As I helped her pack, she held up her hands. The bandages were gone, revealing skin that was healing but would always bear scars. She traced the marks with a finger, feeling textures she'd trained herself to ignore. The sensation made her flinch, but she didn't stop. Feeling meant healing. The drive to her new apartment was quiet. Maya stared out the window, taking in a world she'd shut out for years. Every sensation seemed to overwhelm her. The sun's warmth, the car's vibration, the soft fabric of normal clothes. But she didn't retreat from it. She let herself feel. Victoria met us at the apartment with keys and groceries. Other friends arrived with furniture, dishes, the basics for starting over. Maya moved through the space, touching everything, marveling at textures she'd forgotten existed. When she picked up a fleece blanket and pressed it to her face, tears came. The softness was almost painful after years of pursuing hardness. That first night, she called me panicking. The bed was too soft. She couldn't sleep without the familiar discomfort of her rice mattress. I talked her through it, reminding her that comfort wasn't weakness. Eventually, exhaustion won, and she slept. The early weeks were hard. Maya struggled with daily tasks her damaged hands made difficult. She'd catch herself starting old exercises and have to consciously stop. Our parents' voices echoed in her head, telling her she was getting weak, but she persisted. Therapy began slowly. The psychologist specialized in cult recovery, which is essentially what this was. Maya learned to recognize the programming, to question the beliefs that had been presented as absolute truth. Each session was exhausting, unraveling years of indoctrination. She started attending a support group for people recovering from extreme body modification. Hearing others' stories helped her understand she wasn't alone. Some had gone even further than her. All were trying to find their way back to themselves. The art became her salvation. As her hands healed, her ability capacity to create returned. She painted her journey, the reality room, the measuring sessions, the gradual destruction of her body, but also her recovery, the friends who'd waited, the choice to feel again. A gallery owner saw her work and offered a showing. Maya declined. She wasn't ready to make her pain public. The art was for her, for processing, for healing. Emma visited from Colorado, nervous about meeting Maya, but they connected immediately, bonding over loving someone who'd been damaged by family. Emma's acceptance helped Maya believe she could have normal relationships again. 6 months later, Maya moved to Colorado too, not to be near me, but for the fresh start. She enrolled in art therapy courses, wanting to help others who'd been through trauma. Her hands still bore scars, still ached in cold weather, but they could create again. Our parents never attended the counseling sessions. They retreated into their world, probably finding ways to justify what happened. I heard from a cousin that they'd removed all photos of us, unable to face their failure. The reality room was dismantled, though I doubt they understood why. Maya still struggles. There are days when she feels the pull of her old life, when the softness feels wrong. She keeps one piece of pumice stone as a reminder, not to use, but to remember what she survived. Recovery isn't linear, and she's learning that's okay. We talk every week now, not about the past, but about her art, her classes, her slowly expanding world. She's dating someone who only knows her as she is now, scarred but healing, soft but strong in ways our parents never understood. The call that started this journey feels like a lifetime ago. I thought I was going back to save my sister, but she saved herself. All I did was show her it was possible. The hands our parents tried to make into weapons became tools for creation instead. That's the real strength, choosing to heal, to feel, to be human again. Maya sent me a painting last week. It shows 2 hands, one scarred and thick, one soft and unmarked. They're reaching for each other across a divide. At the bottom, she'd written simply, "Thank you for not giving up." I keep it on my wall, a reminder that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Our parents believed soft skin was weakness. They were wrong. The real weakness was being too afraid to feel. Maya's choosing to feel everything now, and that takes more strength than any callus ever could. Subscribe for more. I'm trying to hit 250,000 by the end of the year.